Welcome to Curious Christianity, and today we are live with Basically Biblical. And Jesse Lucas is going to share with us all there is to know about the Holy Spirit. We're very excited. This is only going to be a 50, 60-hour stream, and then we finally have all the knowledge we need. So, instead, hopefully, he's going to help expound and explain to us about the fruit of the Holy Spirit. And we'll have some other great conversations about the Holy Spirit and maybe some other biblical topics. So, Jesse, welcome to the channel.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, I don't know if I'll get into, well, actually, I know for a fact we're not going to get into everything with the Holy Spirit. There is a lot there to unpack, to discuss, even on the fruit of the Spirit, which kind of think what we're jumping off on tonight. I originally planned on teaching through that. I've got kind of a teaching podcast of my own, and I try to, as I go forward, picking new topics, things like this, I try to be in prayer, make sure that I'm not necessarily just picking a topic that I want to pick and not just discussing stuff that I like discussing, but try to discuss and teach on things that are actually going to be helpful, edifying for people. And I was feeling the fruit of the Spirit was one. My original plan was, okay, I'll do this. It'll be maybe 3 videos, an hour each. I'll give 20 minutes to each fruit. We'll dive in, just hit them quickly and go on. And that led to, I'm not completely done yet. It'll end up being about 10 videos in total. Each one, I think the shortest is just under an hour. The longest I've done so far is about an hour and a half. And there's just a lot to it. And I think a lot of people, especially my experience growing up in Pentecostal charismatic churches, there's a lot of people that completely miss it, what the fruit are and the importance of the fruit. So.
Well, I think that's really important. And, it's amazed me how much you really can get into particular Bible passages and uncover things that were there the whole time, but really we just never noticed. We never paid a close enough attention to really bring out what was the text saying to us? What was the Bible saying to us? And in some cases, yes, what was the Holy Spirit supposed to be saying to us the whole time? So, yeah, it's definitely something worth investigating and looking into. And so you kind of run a kind of teaching podcast. So you just teach through basically the biblical texts, hence your tagline.
Yeah. So the name Basically Biblical actually came, I wanted to do something, but I wasn't 100% sure what it was going to be. And it was more kind of intended to be almost provocative to get people okay, what exactly is this talking about, or what is he covering, things like that. But a lot of what I try to do is, I don't want to say quite like a Mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis, if anyone's familiar with that book, the idea of the basics of the faith, but a little bit further than that. I don't like taking hard stances on things that, especially not dividing stances on things that really don't affect salvation. You and I have talked about this a little bit on our own offline, but the young earth, old earth type stuff, where I land on that, I'm not a young earth creationist. I don't believe that the Bible teaches young earth creation. I don't think you can get to that. But if someone holds to that belief, and they're still brother and sister in Christ, I would lock arms with them and do ministry. Pretty much anything. I may not get into some conversations if people aren't willing to have a civil dialogue on some of those issues, but I like to try to keep it, try to keep it, I guess, basic, if you will. Stuff that really is going to be impactful for people. I do some kind of cultural stuff as well. if I see something in culture and society that's kind of maybe a big deal that I think Christians need to have a certain perspective on, or would be beneficial to view something a certain way, especially if I have thoughts that I don't hear anybody else saying, I will sometimes make a video going over some of those things. But vast majority of what I put out is pretty much teaching, kind of going through like just verse by verse, some topical, but I prefer verse by verse.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. Well, yeah, I'm definitely curious as to what you're going to say, I guess, about this. And yeah, so I guess the fruit of the Spirit are here in Galatians 5:22 through 23, something like that.
Yep.
So where would you like to start?
We can, if you want to start off first, we can just read through. I can either read it or you can read it, either one. I don't know if you can put it up on the screen.
Yeah, you can do that too.
But like I said, Galatians 5, I've sat in this for a while. And the fruit of the Spirit specifically is brought up in verse 22 and 23. But you really, you always want to read stuff in context. And so you can go back further and see prior to this, after this, through the rest of chapter 5, but also into chapter 6. There is a lot there, and I think a lot that shows really the importance of the fruit is in that context around it. What do you have pulled up as the translation wise?
The LSB.
LSB, okay. I can pull that up, so I'm reading what's actually on the screen. Okay.
Yep. All the fruits right there in your perfect LSB.
Okay. Starting in 22, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. So kind of my first view, when I first started going into this, I had heard the fruit of the Spirit. I mean, for the most part, I think most people that grow up in church can kind of go off of memory and at least tell you what the fruit is. Not really go into much deep detail as to what it is, but they can at least say what those individual fruit are. And going into it, I started looking at some resources, trying to find other people that had talked about it. I pulled up a commentary from Martin Luther on Galatians and read through what he had to say. But what I found is there was not a lot of really, when you look at prominent people, there was not a lot of people that had much content on it. There were some individuals that had some books and things like that you could buy. But as far as resources online that were free and readily available, there really wasn't much. I found some, without naming names, there were some bigger churches that are well known that may have had a series going through the fruit of the Spirit, but it was incredibly surface level. So things like talking about the fruit of joy. I remember one specifically, he was saying that he was a Raiders fan for football. And so he was talking about how he had joy when the Raiders would win, but then he didn't, he needs to keep that joy even when they don't win. And that's the fruit of the Spirit. And just what I found was it was either non-existent, or if it was there, it was very, very surface level. There wasn't very much that dug really beyond that. And so as I kind of go in, start looking at that, I start thinking back to, I grew up in Pentecostal charismatic church my entire life up until not even quite a year ago. I've been in Pentecostal charismatic churches. I believe the gifts of the Spirit for today. I'm a continuationist. But looking back, I don't know that I can recall a single sermon, message, anything like that that I've heard on the fruit of the Spirit. I've heard people talk about, maybe love, like especially the love of God and things of that nature, but not specifically pertaining to this passage and what it means for us as believers. So I reached out to a couple of people. I asked my wife, a couple of the friends I had, just off the top of their head, if they could recall ever hearing anything like this. And their response was similar. They're sure that they did, but they can't ever really remember any specifics on it. And so then I'm like, really thinking like this is something that people probably need to be doing more of. I already brought up, grew up charismatic Pentecostal church. And so I saw a lot of the gifts of the Spirit all the time, all over the place. Very, very, very common. And as I start digging into this, you don't see it as much in Galatians, but I start branching out from Galatians and looking at different passages. And I'm looking at specifically the gifts compared to the fruit. And there's a couple different analogies I used. One I heard from somebody else, and it was it's coming up on Christmas time, so we'll use this one. But the difference between the gifts and the fruit, they both come from the Holy Spirit. But think of the gifts of the Spirit as like a Christmas tree, and the fruit of the Spirit like an apple tree. So the fruit, an apple, kind of takes time to develop, cultivate, it has to grow, whereas the gifts can kind of be given instantaneously. One verse that really stuck out to me, I've heard this a million times. I've seen it. I don't even know. I could not count probably how many times I've seen this or heard this quoted. But this really kind of started to shape my focus going into this whole thing. And it was 1 Corinthians 13, verses 1 through 3. And I can pull it up real quick. And most people are going to be pretty familiar, especially with verses 4 through 6. Most of the time, if you go to a Christian wedding, at least here in the West, if you go to a Christian wedding, you hear 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter. They talk, love is patient, love is kind. But prior to that is what really kind of started shaping my view going into this. And another illustration that came to my mind, I don't think I've heard anybody else, or an analogy, I guess, not illustration. I don't think I've heard anybody else with this analogy. I may have and just suppressed it, and I thought that it was my idea. But in 1 Corinthians 13, I'll just read verses 1 through 3. It says, "If I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but do not have love, I have become a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy, and I know all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to remove mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. And if I give all my possessions to feed the poor, and if I surrender my body to be burned, but do not have love, it profits me nothing." So Paul is making a contrast here between different gifts that we see. Tongues, prophecy, both are called out specifically, and he's comparing them to the fruit. But what we see is that the gifts without the fruit, Paul says pretty explicitly it's nothing. And so I came up with this illustration that came to my head is think of the relationship between the fruit and the gifts like the relationship between uh, a new pair of shoes and walking. So a new pair of shoes would be the gifts, and walking would be the fruit. Walking takes time. We have uh, a baby right now. She is almost one. She'll be one next month, and she is still in the process of trying to learn to walk. It's not something that just happens. Even, once she does take her first full steps by herself, it's going to be a one step and fall, and then maybe two steps and fall, and three steps and fall. It's a process. It doesn't happen instantly. It takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of um, intentionality to bring about that skill of walking. Now, a new pair of shoes can be given as a gift, can be received instantaneously, and it can be received without doing a whole lot. And if you look at how those two things go together, if you're walking without the shoes, you can still make progress. You can still go pretty far. But if you have the shoes, that's going to increase the distance that you can go, how fast you can get there, things like that. Now, if you reverse that and you have the shoes, but you don't have the ability to walk, the shoes aren't going to do anything. On the contrary, and going back to the analogy of my daughter learning to walk, if my wife has said this, and I've heard this in other places as well, but you're not supposed to put shoes on infants if they don't walk yet, because it can actually cause damage to their feet, can harm them in some ways there. And so I think about, what Paul said there in First Corinthians, talking about, if I speak in tongues of men and angels, but I don't have love, I'm a noisy gong. Prophecy, if I don't have love. And thinking about some things that I personally have seen in the church, people using gifts that are from God in a way that is not godly, in a way that is maybe even harmful to people. And kind of seeing that and taking that analogy, that really shaped my whole, like I said, shaped my whole focus going into this on the importance of the fruit specifically, but also in contrast with the gifts of the Spirit. I don't
So
think
let me
you
ask
can
you a question about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about that. Can somebody move with the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but yes, not have the fruit of the Spirit? Because this is something for a lot of people who are not in any charismatic camps find it difficult to reconcile. They feel like if you are moving in the power of the Holy Spirit, then you must be filled with the Holy Spirit.
So with that, I would say yes, and I think the Bible backs this up pretty clearly. I don't remember where it's at off the top of my head, but the verse, where Jesus is talking about people coming to him, and they're like, we did all these great things in your name, these signs and wonders in your name, and Jesus says, "Depart from me, I never knew you." He doesn't say, "I knew you, but then I left," or "I knew you and then you walked away." It was, "I never knew you." I do think that there are things that can be done. There are gifts that can be given, and even I think there are people, and I've known some individuals that are like this, that they were once in the church. They were once believers. They were very well grounded, and I saw them move in gifts. One maybe discernment, or maybe you could say prophecy even, but like people that have have spoken things to me directly that they should not have. There's no way that they had any knowledge of that outside of some type of a some type of something outside of them putting that in there. And then I've seen those people also later on walk away and still kind of seem to have some semblance of that, maybe not to the same extent, but I do think it is definitely possible for someone to be working in the gifts and not have the fruit. And that's where I think we do see a lot of people get hurt, damaged in the church. Comes to mind. I'm not sure if you or anybody listening maybe watches Mike Winger very often, but he recently did a kind of a expose on Benny Hinn and
Mhm.
looking everything that's going on there, and there is a lot of bad that has happened there. Like enough so that I agree with kind of where Mike landed on it, that I think Benny Hinn needs to repent. I think there are some major things that he has done wrong and hurt people, but there are people and the people have come out and spoken up positively in defense of him because they have genuinely been healed at a crusade that he did. Sometimes they actually went up onto the stage. Sometimes they were just in the audience. But I do think we see stuff like that. There is evidence that someone can still be healed, or they can still heal somebody, or they can still act in one of the other gifts, maybe without even having the Holy Spirit currently. I'm not sure how you would look at that, as it's something that they've had to have previously, or how exactly God's going to do that. But I do think it is very possible. I've seen it, and I think, like I said, Scripture backs it up, that someone can move in the gifts, but not be putting out the fruit of the Spirit.
Yeah, I think that's important to make the distinction. So, because I mean, some people are following people because it does seem like they're gifted, or for whatever it is. Rather, they seem like they just have a prophetic gift or even a teaching gift, or they just have some sort of very powerful gift, and it seems like God is with them. But we need to judge their character and what's behind all of that. You can't simply look at somebody who has very gifted abilities.
Yeah, and that's something else that really comes up with this whole, as you're diving in and looking at the fruit of the Spirit. There's several like big points that I've kind of seen that were takeaways from this. But one of them, one of the resources I bought, it's a book called The Mark of the Christian by Francis Schaeffer. And
Okay.
he had a quote in there, and I've got it here. It's real short. I'll read it. But he said, the church is to be a loving church in a dying culture. How then is the dying culture going to consider us? Jesus says, by this all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have love one to another. In the midst of our world, in the midst of our present dying culture, Jesus is giving a right to the world. Upon his authority, he gives the world the right to judge you and I, are born-again Christians, on the basis of our observable love towards all Christians. So this whole idea that Jesus has given the right to the world to judge us based on how we love one another as fellow believers. We also see, I mean, in several different places, we see kind of this idea of judging by fruit. We see, Jesus uses the parable of the vine and the branches. if a branch does not bear fruit, it's cut off. It's taken away. That way, the ones that are bearing fruit can bear more fruit. We see, excuse me, but that idea of you will be able to see, and this is where I think we need to, especially in circles that I've been in. I think the charismatic movement is bad about this, really, really bad about this. But be willing to hold leaders accountable. Don't just brush stuff under the rug. Don't refuse to acknowledge wrongs that happen and things like that. I think that's given to us as a sign. If we see bad fruit coming from either from a ministry or specifically from a leader, then that's evidence of what the source is of that ministry or of that leader. That doesn't necessarily mean it's just something that they said that you don't like, or something they did that you don't like. But if you can legitimately see that the fruit that is being produced out of that ministry or out of that individual leader, or even someone that you just attend church with, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a leader, but we're told that we will be able to tell each other by our fruits. Evaluate the fruit, and that will show you what the root is or where the root is. But that was one big takeaway I got with this. Another one, and this kind of goes, I think I really can go with anybody anywhere. But the fruit is found outside of circumstances. It's always found outside of circumstances. When I was doing the video on joy, I spent a good bit of time in Philippians. And Philippians, Paul wrote from prison. And the big theme in Philippians is joy, being joyful, being joyous, rejoicing in the Lord. And so that's something you see kind of as you start going into these two, is that the fruit is not based on circumstances. And so if we go back to the analogy of the tree producing fruit, I've got in my backyard here, not a fruit tree, but it's producing pecans, and those pecans will grow regardless really of what the weather's doing here in the right season. With the if they have what they need, for the tree has what it needs for sustaining that growth, and the roots are in a good spot, then regardless of really what happens weather-wise or what happens around it, it's going to keep producing as long as it's supposed to produce. And even if something bad does come, that's a lot of how trees grow, root development. I remember this from being in middle school in ag, I think it was. But trees get pushed and blown around and things like that when they're smaller, and that causes the roots to shift back and forth and opens up space. And then once that shifting stops, the roots can grow out even further because of the space that's been opened up because of the storm that the tree has gone through. So that's another really, really big one. And I think that's one, maybe not the biggest takeaway, but definitely one of the biggest ones, is the fruit is found outside of circumstances completely. It's not bound to what we're going through.
What do you mean when you say it's found outside of circumstances? Because to me, like the way you phrase that, it makes it sound like, yeah, you'll only see the fruit when you're not in circumstances, when you're outside of them.
Okay. So I use a story in the video. I'm gonna try to go off of memory for this. But I say, talking about joy specifically, if let's say I win the lottery today, and I have
Mhm.
just a ton of money that comes in, and I decide, I'm going to take this money, and me and my family are going to go on a beach trip. And so we load up in our minivan and we start driving to the beach, and we have this whole day plan. It's going to be awesome. Everything's going right. And I'm feeling good about the situation. It could be joy. But if I'm feeling that strictly because I'm in a good situation or things are going well, then that would be really what would be called happiness. So happiness is based off of immediate things that are happening to you. Now, joy would be, let's say that same trip, and we start on our way, and then I find out on the drive there, we get halfway there, and I found out there's actually a mess up. I didn't win the lottery. I didn't win anything at all. So the money that I was expecting to come in didn't come in. And we end up, the tire blows out. And so I have to pull over, and it's raining. And so I'm stuck in my van on the side of the road with all my kids that are upset because now we're not going to the beach like we talked about. And my wife's upset because she's also stuck in the car with me with all of our kids that are upset. And so even in a situation like that, where the circumstance that you're in is not necessarily a pleasant or a positive circumstance, you can still have that joy. Think of peace is another one that's really, I think, easy to see. We see. I think about like early Christians when they were under a lot of persecution, going in like the Colosseum, even I can't remember his name.
Telemachus.
I don't know.
Okay.
He was
Well, I don't know either.
he was, I don't remember when it was.
I'm pretty sure it was Maximus. That's who you were thinking of.
Well, he was going to be burned at the stake, and as they're piling up the firewood to burn him, he is praying for the people that are doing this. Or even, look at, best example, Jesus on the cross, praying for the people that are holding him there, praying for the people that have sinned, that have caused him to go there. And in that situation, even the anguish, the anxiety that's there, the pain that's there, the peace that is able to be seen in how he's handling the situation.
And so, yes, it's really just this idea that when you are full of the Spirit, or you have the fruit of the Spirit, these attributes supersede all circumstances. Doesn't matter what's going on the outside. All that matters is how the Spirit is in you on the inside. Yep. And I think that is and can be really, really powerful. And it's really powerful when other people get to see you go through just the most hellish situations and see your life not change. And I know one of my pastors, they were talking about that because, for a lot of pastors, when COVID hit, it was a major existential crisis. For many of them, they were practically run out of their churches or different situations. And they went from, hey, yeah, being the center of attention, on Sunday mornings to like, okay, what are we going to do now? And everyone was kind of going like, who am I? What's going on? And one of my pastors that I had heard, he was pretty much the same. And, everyone was kind of like, dude, like, how did you get through that? And he's like, what do you mean? He just kept doing his devotions, kept meeting with God, and kept being filled up and, weathered that storm just by plugging along.
Yeah. And that's, we see, I was going to say something. I just lost it.
So tell me, let's go back a little bit to like Galatians and stuff like this. So how many fruits are there?
In total, we have 9.
Yeah. But isn't it really just one, Jesse?
You could kind of sum it up as one. Love basically goes through all of those.
Well, I mean, I'm just saying, like, you just read the verse. It's the fruit of the Spirit.
Oh, okay. I get what you're saying. Yeah. And with this too, I just remembered the point I was going to make. It is something that you will see throughout all circumstances that you're in, but that doesn't mean that, just like with everything else, we're not perfect. We're not going to be perfect. It's something that takes time, and there may be one day that you perfectly exemplify the showing love to somebody, and the next day you really don't. But it's a continual progression, getting better, going through, working at it, and seeing like where you're being honest with yourself, seeing where you're falling short, praying about it, going to God about it, and continuously trying to work at that. That's it just came back to me. But no, so with, yes, one fruit, I think all of it comes from the same source. So these are things that you're going to see, and I think a lot of the difference is more about how it is observable to others, than there really being a huge difference in, because the source is the same. The source is the Holy Spirit. But the difference is going to be how it's observed by other people. So joy will look different than patience will, or self-control, or things like that, when a lot of it comes back to, it's that same source.
So, what's kind of been like one of the hardest lessons for you personally going through this study?
Probably patience. I have always been the type of person that I want to have a plan. I want to have it all figured out. I am very much, if we're going on vacation, I know what we're gonna do, when we're gonna do it. We even are like, we have free time, but our free time is scheduled. Like, I want to have it all planned out. And I'll say honestly, with all of the fruit, I was able to see a good bit in my own life that I was not living up to what I should be living up to. I was not doing the things that I should be doing. But patience for me, and the thing that really stuck out to me, is patience is not just, a good way, I think, to summarize patience is it's waiting in God's place and going at God's pace. So it's not just about necessarily waiting time-wise for something to happen. It could be waiting in a specific situation. That could be in a certain season of your life. That could be in a job. That could be in, numerous different things. But that falls back to trusting that God is in control, that ultimately He knows what's best for you. And for me personally, that's something that I was already kind of aware that was something that I struggled with and I needed to do better about working with. But getting in and really digging in on that, it made it even more clear how much of an issue it was for me, and how much I do need to still work on that one. But like I said, all of them, every single one, I was trying to, as I went through, self-evaluate, and every single one I was able to see areas of my life that I need to do better with on this specific thing. And it and not so many words, it really wrecked me going through and doing this in a very, very good way.
So it's just kind of the what do you call it? Conviction. You're kind of getting convicted as you're looking through your life. Yeah. I find some of this a little bit interesting just regarding you coming from a more Pentecostal Holy Spirit background. And kind of in regard to that, actually, I really want to pop up good old Eastgate Adoptionist has a good question.
Okay.
And this one is a really interesting one, right? Because people do talk about fruit of the Spirit, gifts of the Spirit, connecting the Holy Spirit with all these. What do you think about, can fallen angels trick people into thinking they have gifts of the Spirit?
Um, if I just have to give a yes or no answer, I would say probably yes. Now, my reason for this, I I have a job where I'm able to just sit and I listen to stuff pretty constantly. And
Mm-hmm.
one podcast that I have that's in my rotation is Remnant Radio, and they are
Yep, I've heard of them.
okay. So anyone that's not familiar, they're charismatics. I believe they're all three pastors, and they do a lot of stuff with the gifts of the Spirit, but they do a lot of their focus is the kind of policing the gifts. Um, they do every year at the end of the year, they look back at prophecies that have been given for the year and actually evaluate it. Like, was this legitimate? Did we actually see this come to pass? And if not, mark these people as they're not doing this right. But I was
They should
listening.
do a rest episode. It's like, all right, we're policing them, and at the end is like, and today we've arrested so and so preacher as a.
they they've done a ton, and I think there are times where I think they can um, maybe be a little slow. They're better than I think most people that are in the charismatic camp that are doing it. But they can be maybe a little slow to, I think, condemn stuff that needs to be condemned. But I bring them up because there was a series they were doing. I don't remember exactly what it was, looking at different spirits or things like this. And there was one they brought up, and this like floored me when I saw it. It was called, a lot of this is the I don't know what you would call them, deliverance ministry guys, I guess.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
like Isaiah Saldivar and
See, I've heard that name. I actually don't know who this is. I've seen somebody else like make some stuff about it, and I'm like,
he's
okay.
he he's a brother. I'd say he's a brother. I think he focuses a lot on stuff and puts a lot of importance on stuff that should probably have his focus elsewhere. But I'd say he's a brother. But their whole focus is delivering people from spirits, evil spirits. They do preach a correct gospel, but I think they get so focused on some spiritual stuff where they can kind of get to where it's like there's a demon under every rock.
Yeah.
Now, they're going on Remnant Radio, they're going through and looking at these different so-called spirits. And one they brought up was, I think it had been called the Kundalini spirit. And
I've heard of this one.
so
This one I have heard of.
okay. So the thing that floored me with it was they showed a video, and it was at this, I believe it's Hindu, but it was at this gathering where this Kundalini spirit had supposedly come in and started affecting people. And the reactions I was seeing people having, if I had not been informed that it was at a Hindu service, whatever you would call it, I would have sworn it was a Pentecostal church. Seeing how people were acting and reacting to everything that was going on. I do think it is very, very much a possibility that a fallen angel could convince someone that they were doing something in the spirit. I think we have we see that some bigger movements. I think Islam was kind of brought about by persuasion from maybe not Satan himself, but maybe Satan himself or some type of demonic presence. I think we could say the same with some Christian cult type groups, Mormonism, Jehovah's Witness, things like that. And so if they can do something that major, I think they definitely could convince someone that they had gifts. I think there's something like kind of weird that happens because we are mortal beings bound by, our fleshly bodies, and we are having an interaction with when we're having an interaction with God, we're having an interaction with a completely like immortal, perfect, just undescribable being. And so we may not always know how that's going to look for us. And I think you can kind of see that too if you have an experience with an angel or a fallen angel or things of that nature. It can look really weird, and it can look really, really similar to God. And that's where I think it's important to be judging the fruit and not just go off of if someone appears to have gifts.
Yeah, it's really important that we kind of make that differentiation. And I think that it's really, really challenging for a lot of people who are kind of in the wake of somebody's gifts. For somebody that really is truly incredibly gifted, maybe they're just an incredible speaker, they're incredibly charismatic, and their life looks really good. It's difficult to kind of see beneath that sometimes. And that's why I think that we see these terrible falls of all these different pastors, because their gifts just outshined what everyone else was looking at. Nobody else could really see the character beneath because they were so distracted by how incredibly charismatic and seemingly loving and caring, compassionate, and fill in the blank, all these other things. And then, you have big falls like, well, in the charismatic camp, Mike Bickle, right? You have the Mike Bickle issue. For the rest, Ravi Zacharias was most, and then finally for the Calvinist, Stephen Lawson, right?
Yep.
So it's like, all right. Those are like three entirely different, kind of persuasions inside of Christianity. And I feel like they kind of represent almost the whole spectrum of people because,
I think with that too, and I kind of touched on this when we first started getting into this idea of evaluating leaders by their fruit. You brought up three really good examples there, and I think all three of those camps are really, really bad about being super quick to call out anybody that is outside of their camp, but is way too slow to call out people in their own camp. Like I said, I'm a continuationist. I believe the gifts of the Spirit are for today. I try to be as much as I can, and I've seen, without going into a ton of detail, just because we can go into it. I don't have an issue, but kind of for time's sake, I've seen a lot of really bad stuff come out of charismatic churches. I was born and raised, like I said, in a charismatic church. We were in a church that ended up it split, and it split really, really badly. If it had not been for me having a dad that was grounded in the word, but also grounded in the belief that the gifts are still for today, I would have, without a doubt, either walked away from the faith altogether. If I didn't, I for sure would have been a cessationist. I would have said the gifts are not for today. Now,
and that is what I feel like happens to some people.
Yep.
Like they kind of, it's like a lot of things. You get burned by the charismatic movement, and if you don't leave Christianity altogether, you leave the charismatic movement, and you're just like, that's it. Gifts aren't for today because of how much destruction harm and pain somebody goes through. And I understand that natural inclination, but I have a funny little story that to me illustrates it. One time, a long time ago, I got sick after eating mozzarella cheese sticks, right?
Okay.
And so as a result, right, I could not eat mozzarella cheese sticks, right? It was absolutely repulsive to me. Like my brain subconsciously, right, it really pushed an effort. It's like, no, those are terrible. But I knew intellectually, it's like, no, cheese sticks are good. So I proactively retrained my brain to eat mozzarella sticks again. Like my stomach literally went from like the sight of them would make me nauseous. Like it was literally, I could just feel all of that kind of pain of being sick before.
Yeah.
And so what I did was I heavily masked them in marinara sauce. And like progressively retrained my brain to understand, no, these are good again. And I think that is a degree of when we really understand that something is true, we sometimes have to retrain ourselves when somebody's hurt us in the name of those movements.
Yeah, I would agree. And that's, I try to be fair. But I try to be, I don't want to say quick because I don't want to jump to conclusions, with stuff, but I don't want to reserve calling out sin or things like that on somebody just because they happen to be from the same flavor of Christianity as me. And with that too, I think that a criticism of the continuationist movement, I think, is going to hold a lot more weight coming from someone who is a continuationist than someone who's not. I think I brought up the Mike Winger thing with him looking at Benny Hinn, and I know prior to that, Justin Peters had done a lot of stuff focusing on Benny Hinn, and anybody who was a continuationist, they just said, no, he doesn't believe the gifts are for today. They're instantly just writing him off because of his starting point. Now, I think Justin Peters still, there's some stuff I think that he gets wrong, and I think he does go too far because of his starting point. But I also think there's a lot of good that Justin Peters does. But I think the critique from Mike Winger was even more impactful because Mike is so much of an outspoken continuationist. He believes the gifts are for today. And so whether or not you regardless of what your belief is on that issue, I think everybody in Christianity could do a better job. And I think Christianity as a whole would be a lot better off if we all were more willing to critique, criticize, and call out issues in our own camp. And I'm not saying like ignore everything in every other camp. I don't think that's a good idea either. But there is, I've seen it all over. Anytime anything happens, like even the Steve Lawson stuff recently, people that were kind of in that Calvinist camp, not everybody. I did see some Calvinists that were very quick to jump on it, but I did see some that were kind of more slow walking it, that had really jumped on the Mike Bickle stuff very, very early, very quick. So that's something I think would be beneficial. And it kind of goes back to this, the whole idea of judging by the fruit that you see. An apple tree cannot produce oranges as much as you might want to. And even, temporarily you might be able to tape some oranges up on that apple tree. But once you get close enough, you're going to be able to see that it's not natural. It's not going to look right. And that's the same thing, I think, with the ministry. There's going to be signs there. Whether you want to look at it or not, there will be signs.
Yeah. And that's one area. Like I watched that discussion between Michael Brown. It was Michael Brown. There was four of them. It was Justin Peters, Michael Brown, Sam Storms, and I don't actually know the other guy just to be upfront.
Yeah.
So sorry for whatever his name is. But to me, this is where, like, I was really on Justin Peters' side. He was doing a great job kind of arguing his points. But then as soon as Michael Brown brought up the issues with Martin Luther, it was like everything went downhill so fast because Justin Peters and the other guy were defending Martin Luther. And Michael Brown brought up very legitimate quotes from Martin Luther that are, I think, potentially worse as far as the words being said, more condemning against Martin Luther than the other examples that Peters was bringing up. And it just seemed as like, yep, okay, this is where you're holding a double standard. You are not being legitimate in this. When you want to defend this horrible, horrible stuff that Martin Luther had said, which was so much worse than some of the things that the charismatics that he was condemning. And it was just like, yeah, like, hey man, just be upfront and say like, yeah, Martin Luther's, terrible and condemned and all that stuff. So it's like, let's be fair.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had watched that too. I actually watched it twice. I watched the actual like conversation that they had, and then I don't remember who it was, but somebody did kind of a breakdown of a couple different segments, and they kind of gave some feedback and stuff. But no, I agree. And that's even in that, I think not all four. Even like on the continuationist side there, Michael Brown and Sam Storm are kind of, I mean, they're both continuationists, but I know Sam Storms is a Calvinist, I believe, and Michael Brown is more evangelical. And I know they talked about Mike Bickle in that, and that was prior to all the stuff coming out. And I will say, I've seen Sam Storms, I think, did well with that situation from what I was able to see. He and knowing how close he was to Mike Bickle. Now, when the allegations first came out, I know it was more of he didn't believe that was true, but he went to find out if it was true. And then once he confirmed, like, yes, this actually happened, he didn't hold back his public condemnation of the actions of Mike Bickle. That I think is good. I think a lot of people, I think, shy away from stuff like that because they feel it's maybe too divisive. They feel that maybe it looks bad for people on the outside looking into Christianity that, hey, we see these people are arguing, or hey, this leader had this moral issue and it's causing a bunch of division inside the church. But I think on the contrary, I think it brings health. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and in bringing stuff to light, not being what would the right word be?
I don't know.
not being proud of what's happened, but being public. Like, it's especially too if I think something should be called out or should be made known to people at the same level that person was at. So someone who just attends a church, let's say they're not in any position of leadership, they don't even maybe lead a Bible study or anything like that. Like, they just purely attend a church and that's it. And they have some type of a moral issue. I think with that, that person can go to the pastor, or if, let's say it's a husband that's cheating on his wife, I think they can just go to the pastor. There's no need to bring it up to the rest of the congregation. There's no need to bring it up, make it public. We'll keep going back to Mike Bickle with that situation, with the platform that he had. I do think there's a necessity to condemn that from the level that he was at, because if not, I think it comes across as you're trying to sweep this under the rug. I think willingness to call out things like that, I I think can promote health in the church, but also it can be a deterrent for other people. You know, if you're coming up in leadership and you see, oh, let's say someone that's getting a larger church and they start seeing some of these people. So there's been several this year that have come out, like things like that have happened. But seeing some of this, I'm sure for some people, it's like making them think twice about safeguards that they have in place, even if they have no intention of doing anything like that. You know, I'm sure any of these guys that found themselves in a situation like that, they had no intention of getting to that point, but they didn't have safeguards in place. They made stupid decisions that put them in a position where it was much easier for something to happen. And so eventually it got to where they were intentionally doing this stuff and making these choices and living out this way. And seeing this stuff come to light, I'm sure there are people now that are coming up and getting bigger churches and growing their ministries and things like that are seeing this, and it's making them think twice, like, hey, I need to make sure, like, I've got some stuff in place so this doesn't happen, because I don't want in 10 years that to be me that is plastered all over social media, that I had this moral failing and I'm trying to sweep it under the rug or say I didn't do it, or brush off allegations or anything like that. Like, be be above reproach. Be so far removed from situations like that it's really not even possible for allegations to be made. So I do think there's, even though you don't want to see it happen, I think there's benefit that is being called out and it's being brought up.
Yeah. I think that one of the other issues that everyone faces is actually that there's a root that kind of takes hold in a lot of them. And it doesn't have to do with the circumstances. Like sure, circumstances are important. It's good to have boundaries. It's good to have all these other sorts of kind of defenses in place. But the issue is that it begins in the heart. It begins in the desires. It begins in the kind of broken pieces of us and the parts that are longing for something else or for something more. And I think that that's really one of the major issues, is that, you know what? A pastor who's healthy emotionally, who's healthy spiritually, doesn't really end up in those arenas.
Yeah.
And one who is extremely unhealthy and unemotional, there's no amount of circumstances which you can set up in which he won't fall.
Yeah.
It's like when you want it enough, when you're broken enough, when you need something else, when something else is just drawing at you day after day, it's really more a matter of time. So I think that it's important that we really are have the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. And that's something that's on the inside, and like many people are talking about the distinction between, like, Hollywood celebrities and the average person. And it's like, oh, well, but they've got all the money and the power and fame and all those things. Yeah, cool. But they don't have inner peace. Like, there's so many of them that honestly, some of them that just admit it. They've even just said it on podcasts. Like, are they actually happy? No, not really. Yeah. Like, I think it was, I can't remember his name right now. Donald Glover, or I can't remember. But anyway, I don't remember, but maybe it was him. But I was just talking about, he's like, yeah, I mean, he's like, I'm not really happy. He's like, every other day he's still thinking about, like, oh yeah, what would it be like for my life to be over? And it's not an unwelcome prospect. And the truth is you don't have love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness. You don't have those things inside you. And when you don't have those inside of you, you're kind of stuck, because you're like, okay, like, I don't have those things. And you think that the answer is outside of yourself, and it is, because it's from God, but it's what God needs to provide for you on the inside, not what God needs to provide for you on the outside. And so if you keep looking for the solution outside, You keep looking for it in the external. It's like, I need more food. I need more exercise. I need more sleep. That's just not how it is. And that's exactly one of the major things that really, really convicted me about Jesus' condemnation sort of the apostles when they're in the Garden of Gethsemane. They're in the Garden of Gethsemane and they're tired. They might even be hungry, I don't know. But it's been a long, long day. And now Jesus is telling them, stay up and pray. Because you know what? They're about to undergo temptation. They're about to undergo this huge, temptation in front of them. And Jesus doesn't tell them, hey guys, get some rest because it's about to get rough. Instead, he tells them, stay up and pray that you will not fall to the temptation.
Yeah.
And so
And
I think that's the issue.
No, that's I think that's good. That kind of ties in with one of the final points I wanted to make with the fruit of the Spirit is I've seen kind of an uptick of this in at least the kind of the people that are close to me. There is he's not a pastor anymore. Used to be a pastor. He lives kind of around where I live. I don't actually have him on social media, but he had my wife on social media from forever ago. And so she shows me these things that he posts, and it is like every single day he will, it's just really, really simple. And it's just saying like, there's sometimes I kind of agree with what he's saying, but the idea of what he's pushing, I don't. And it's like, so one day he may say, having, wearing clothes made of two materials won't send you to hell. And then the next day he'll post something about eating pork won't send you to hell. Okay, yeah, I would agree with both of those. We're in the new covenant. And then he starts posting pretty blatantly sinful stuff. It's not going to send you to hell. And knowing kind of where he stands on some stuff, it kind of ties into this idea of hyper grace, which Paul condemns in Galatians. But in Galatians 5, and this, when I was the first video I did was kind of an introduction for their fruit and just setting up why it's important, what it looks like, some maybe basic ideas for how to kind of start seeing some growth personally. But Galatians 5:16 and 18 say, but I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not carry out the desire of the flesh. For the flesh sets its desire against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. For these are in opposition to one another, so that you do not do the things that you want. 18, and this is the kicker. But if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. And this is something I think a lot of people don't fully grasp, this idea of what Paul is saying here in verse 18. If you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. So, Jesus didn't come so that you can just do whatever you want. Jesus came to pay the punishment for the sin that we have committed. Now, you still have to make a decision to, trust in him and accept that. And part of that is you will live a life that's led by the Spirit. You'll see growth. You'll see the fruit of the Spirit develop in your life. If you are not being led by the Spirit, then you have not partaken of that with Jesus. You've not accepted what he's done for you. Then you are still under the law. This idea that, Jesus' death isn't just a free pass that you can continue to do whatever you want. And Paul even says this too, that, grace isn't there so that you can continue on sinning. If you do, then you cheapen grace. But this, and like I said, I don't know if other people have seen this too, but I've seen a pretty large uptick in this I call the hyper grace movement. But this idea that you can do whatever, and it's tricky because of kind of how they phrase it too. I don't even necessarily disagree with straight up the words that they're saying, but it's more the intention that's behind it. Do I believe that you can be forgiven of any sin? Yes. If someone is, let's say there's, I don't know, there's someone who is an assassin and that's their job.
Okay.
They go around, they just forever, like that's what they do. Can they be forgiven? Yeah. Someone who is, they're a, I'll get around YouTube searches for you. They are a certain type of worker, and they go around and they have many different people they work for. If they decide to come to Christ, can they do that? Will they be forgiven of those sins? Yes, but there is a change of heart that needs to happen. Because I think if that change of heart doesn't happen, then you're not really putting your trust in Jesus. You're not really putting your faith in his work on the cross to pay for that sin. And so that's, I think there's a lot of, and we see it a lot in progressive Christianity, that I don't think they really grasp this whole idea that Jesus is more just a fun-loving, just lovey-dovey hippie, do whatever you want. It's all just love and just making you feel good. And hey, if it makes you happy, then go for it. And that is not at all what the actual message of the cross is. Like I've said, I'm currently working on, so I'm turning a lot of this into, I'm working on actually making a book, and we'll see when it's actually going to come out. The plan was for the end of this year. I can say definitively it's not going to be out at the end of this year. I think I'm currently sitting at like 42,000 words, and I'm a little over halfway maybe. It's pretty lengthy, but one thing the part I'm currently writing is I'm talking about the gospel is offensive just by nature. The whole idea of the gospel is, and it goes kind of counterculture to what we have in our society today. And today in our society, in our cultures, we hear, you're good enough. Like you're good enough. You don't need to change. You're fine. You're great. People just need to accept you for who you are. And that is really the opposite of what we hear in the gospel. And it's offensive in nature. I say that because people don't really understand it. The gospel is you're not good enough, but that's okay because Jesus was. And so I think there is, talking about issues in the church, and I think this is possibly even a bigger one, because I think this can very easily lead to people walking into hell, whether that's annihilationism or eternal damnation. We'll see.
You can find out tomorrow night as I debate Turds and Fan on the topic.
So I mean, that is, I think, possibly even a bigger issue than some of the other that we've talked about, because it is leading to separation from God.
So let me talk about that for half a second, because I have so for example, Chris Date, he did a little debate with a woman named Rebecca, and they debated on the topic about homosexuality. Okay. And if you want to watch that debate, anyone can go and watch it. It's on Trinity Radio. Chris Date talking about the issue with Rebecca. So here's, to me, my really big thing, because to me this fits into this area right here. Like, one, you're talking about like this, okay, like Galatians 5, 18, 19, right? And 20, right? So, but if you are led by the Spirit, you are not under the law. All right, cool. led by the Spirit, not under the law. So therefore we will not reap the condemnation of the law, right? That sounds good. Now the deeds of the flesh are evident, right? And then it's going to make this list. Now, let's just contrast this a little bit with exactly what we're talking about. If we kept the same theme, I don't know why Paul didn't think of this. Maybe he wasn't a good preacher. I don't know. But what he should have said was, and I'm joking a little bit for those that are hardcore out there. What he should have said was, the fruit of the flesh is evident, which is sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, all these things, right? And so it's contrasting, right? They're both fruit, right? It's the fruit of the Spirit and the fruit of your flesh. And here's my really big issue. In the Old Testament, we talk about false prophets who lead the children of Israel into idolatry, people who, lead the children of Israel into these things. Nobody has a problem today condemning false prophets. False prophets are terrible, horrible. Yeah, we should condemn them. We should not celebrate them or any of those things. All right, fine, cool. Anyone who comes out and promotes homosexuality as acceptable, to me, should be condemned on the same level. I've kind of thought about and wandered back and forth on okay, how do I reconcile? How do we deal with some of these people who we disagree on certain issues? And how serious is this issue? And of course, what do we talk about is, well, we want to agree on the essentials and disagree on the non-essentials. As far as I can tell, this is an essential issue. And I do think it will cost you your salvation. It will, however you want to parse that out. I know some people are like, oh, you can't lose your salvation. Let's leave that aside for a moment, right? If we just talk about what is actually happening, in other words, somebody who is practicing a homosexual lifestyle, a promiscuous lifestyle, fill in the blank. And then you have the other person who is promoting those lifestyles. Will they have eternal life? And to me, the answer is no. I don't think that Paul is even unclear on this issue. Yeah. And so therefore, to me, anyone who wants to come out and tell everyone else, hey, look, it's okay to live this lifestyle. It's okay to be sexually immoral. Now, I know they would never say that they are talking about sexual immorality. But if the Bible is clear, if what, Chris argued in his debate is true, which I think it was very sound and very strong, then yeah, there really is no any ambiguity in this. And therefore I have a very difficult time now being as kind or nice towards those that want to promote such behaviors, because it's yes, you're leading people astray, and I'm having a difficult time discerning what is the difference between them today and the false prophets in the Old Testament. So I think that is a really, really big issue.
I think I would pretty much agree. I didn't see that debate. I will say, in my opinion, Chris Date is probably one of the best debaters debating publicly today. He's but
I've just had two people say that I should debate him, and I'm all for it. We might get around to it.
He's good. I disagree with him on stuff. Obviously, I'm pretty sure he's Calvinist, or maybe not full Calvinist. I don't know, but
he is a Calvinist. I can tell it. No, he is.
Okay,
he's a full Calvinist.
So he, with that issue, I would agree. I don't see how it strikes me as similar to, we see in was it Jeremiah, where, and this is a verse that is kind of frequently, I think, used by people out of context, but it's Jeremiah 29:11. I have a plan for you to prosper, and this is talking to the children of Israel. But what is lost a lot on the context there, they're getting ready to go into captivity. They're getting ready to go through like this bad stuff, and it's going to be like, I think it's like 70 years before they come out of it. Now the contrast to Jeremiah there saying like, hey, like, yes, God has a plan for you, but we're about to go through some crap. The contrast to that's the Jesse Lucas paraphrase. The contrast to that is these other prophets who are they're saying no, like that's not going to happen. Like we're and so they're saying things that sound nicer, maybe. They're not hurting people's feelings. They are, trying to they wouldn't call it politically correct, but trying to take the politically correct line there, but they are not actually speaking the words of God. They are not actually saying what God is saying. And God spoke the truth through Jeremiah. It was a hard truth. Ultimately, it was a good truth because God was going to bring them back out of that. It wasn't a permanent thing where God was just throwing them away. But just as you were talking, that came to mind. I would agree. I think someone who is someone who is guiding a person to spiritual death, and I think the Bible is clear that not, and I do think how you phrase this was correcting. Not somebody that has temptation towards that. Someone that is actively living a lifestyle. I think someone that is guiding them to that spiritual death. I don't see how that is excusable. I see that as a major issue as well. But yeah, that came to mind as you were talking through that.
Yeah, I just think that it's a huge issue, and I feel like honestly, just in general, like we have progressive Christianity that's around, and of course that's, to me, it's of course debatable. It depends on which area that you want to call it even Christianity. But so we have this arena, but we have such a softening that I feel like even some of the more evangelical churches are softening in how we talk about those who promote this. It's one thing to talk about like someone who's living the lifestyle. It's another thing to talk about even those who promote these ideas. And so I think it's becoming a very, very challenging issue because we're all products of our own culture. Like that's just inescapable. Nobody can get around their own culture. And of course, our culture is changing a lot in America. There's so many things that are changing and evolving and growing and all of that. And so it's rather difficult to navigate the turns. And I'm scared so much more for kind of the next generation, because I feel like many of the other scholars and those who are going to Bible college, to going to seminary, they're coming away with many things that are simply, products of their culture. And the problem with the younger generation is they don't necessarily know that it's different from the older years. So let's see. Here we go.
Go ahead.
Here's a text for you.
Yep. I was thinking that, or even I saw the I forget the name of it. He Gets Us, I think. The commercials that came on during the Super Bowl. And there's
yes, that's right. The Super Bowl commercial.
There, yeah, and again, this is another one of those things that I don't completely disagree with what they actually put up there, the picture that they put up. But I think the intention behind it kind of makes me question all of it, because from what I've seen, it's very much in that wheelhouse of you know, Jesus just wants you to be happy, and that's not really sin, or, you know, the Bible is just outdated at that time, and we need to, you know, kind of reevaluate now with our current society. Um, but that I actually I think I put out a short after that commercial came out that had a clip of that, and then a buddy of mine took it, and then he put right after the clip he put a picture of somebody like getting pulled down underwater with a giant millstone around their neck, and it said he gets us, kind of mocking the whole campaign. But that is like Andy Stanley is one that really, my opinion, Andy Stanley went off the reservation a long time ago. I think some other people are just finally starting to maybe catch up on that. I remember having an argument with a friend. I mean, it's been years ago. Andy Stanley made a comment that we need to unhook the Old Testament from Christianity, I believe was the language that he actually used. And my response is, I think we need to unhook Andy Stanley from Christianity. But now he has gone completely, like, I mean, I think he is as affirming, as close to affirming that is not sin as you can be without. To my knowledge, he's not straight up said that's not sin. But he's talked about, I mean, he's done a conference for pastors talking about specifically how to kind of slowly ease your church towards accepting this, towards being okay with this. I mean, he's got people that are in same-sex marriage or relationship, like in leadership at his church over people, like that are not, again, not just someone who is dealt with temptation, that has said, no, I'm dying to myself, I'm giving all of myself to Jesus. That is just part of living in a fallen world. That is a way that I am tempted, that does not align with what God created for me and what is best for me. But someone who is actively giving into that lifestyle, actively living that lifestyle, are in leadership at his church, from what I've seen. And that is like another one, you know, going back to I mean, this is a little bit different than the moral failings. I still a moral failing, I guess, but it's going to, I think, until Christians get comfortable with being uncomfortable and drawing those lines in the sand and saying, no, I am not, like, this is not happening in my church. I think we do need to have some Christians that if you're attending a church and that starts to be the norm, I think we need to have some people that are willing to maybe even stick it out for a little bit to cause a scene, to make some noise about this not being okay. This is something that I typically, when I can be pretty abrasive, just naturally. I'm not afraid of confrontation. I'm not afraid of having an argument. I can sometimes come off too strong when I maybe don't need to be. That's where my wife is really good at kind of reeling me back in a lot of times, and helping me kind of fluctuate, like, hey, like, you know, maybe you're a little too much here. Typically, if I'm dealing with someone who's not a believer, or even if maybe they are a believer, but they're just attending a church, I will be much more gracious in how I address it, in the tone that I'm using, in how stern maybe I am in my speech and things like that. But if it is a leadership in a church, or someone who has a platform, or who is a mega church pastor, or who has a massive podcast, or things like that, I am going to be a lot more vocal. I'm going to be a lot more, I'll still choose my words carefully, but I'm going to be intentionally a lot more abrasive and harsh with my speech. And I think there's biblical backing for that too. But I think that's who we should be harsher with, are the people that are making those calls and leading people towards spiritual death by the hand.
So tell me this, because I'm curious, because you said you left the charismatic or Pentecostal movement, Pentecostal churches. So what kind of church do you go to now, or which one do you promote, I guess?
So
do you go to
the
church?
that I go to
Let's start
now,
there.
I do go to church. Oh yeah. We even with when I was having concerns with the church that I was attending, we did not stop attending there until we hadn't decided on a church yet, but there was like several in the area that we went and kind of went a couple weeks and tried out. I met with some pastors and things like that. But that was something I made sure, like, we're not taking time out of church. We will be in a church. We may not know for sure like what our home church is going to be right away. But the church that I'm at now is the denomination is Baptist, but one of the things I sat down with the my current pastor before we ended up going there, and just kind of felt where he was at with some different issues and things like that theologically. There are things that, like, and we can agree on, or we can disagree on, and I can still go in fellowship. Like, it's not going to be that big of an issue. But he has his views have shifted. He was very much more, I guess, like fundamentalist on a lot of things, and his views, in talking with him over the last several years, have shifted. And so he said they're a Baptist church, but he sees that as just, it's a word on the front of the building. And that's
so
it.
What you're saying is that
just take it off.
Left young earth creationism. Is that what happened?
I don't know. That didn't come up. So the issue that I was
if
having,
he ever needs any help leaving,
I will, at some point, I'm sure that's going to end up coming up, because I have a tendency to jump into theological conversation anytime there is even like a remote possibility of a theological conversation happening. My wife sometimes likes it. Sometimes it annoys just the crap out of her, because then I get into like these really deep, heavy conversations, and she wants to leave and like go eat lunch or something. And so I'm sure it will come up. But if it does, that's one point that, like I said before, I don't think that you can get to young earth creation from the Bible. I think you have to do some exegesis there. I was born and raised believing that was it. Like, that was it, and that the Bible clearly taught that, and that was the only thing the Bible taught. I don't think that's the case now. Obviously, I've said that. I think you can believe that. You're still a brother. And even with something like that, I don't know that I would not have issue fellowshipping regularly with someone who was a young earth creationist. My experience has been that someone that is a young earth creationist may have issue fellowshipping with me on a regular basis, but
yeah,
I don't see it as an issue to necessarily divide over.
Well, and that's why, like, so I've had several friends ask me, like, oh, why are you only speaking against young earth creationists, or why are you only talking about that? And my response has typically been, well, because they're the only ones who throw rocks. Like I haven't really met too many angsty old earth creationists, not saying they don't exist, because I'm sure they do.
Yeah.
But for the most part, it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, well, the young earth creationists are the one who are saying, like, if you don't believe this, you don't believe in the gospel, you don't believe in the inerrancy of the Bible, you don't believe basically in any of the truths that the Bible affirms, and you don't believe Jesus' words. And it's like, okay, like those are really, really big claims. You know, the old earth creationist, like, oh, you're a young earth creationist?
Yeah.
All right, whatever. Oh, you're theistic? Well, whatever. They just kind of mill around
Yeah.
and don't really care too much. So yeah, that's
Yeah.
a
And
little bit more so why
that's
it's like pushing back.
no, and that's, I mean, that's kind of what really got me. So one of the, and this is, I'm going to have Adam come on my channel here in the near future, and this is one thing I want to kind of dive into. So we won't get too much into it right now, maybe. But
Yeah,
you know, one of the first things for me that kind of got me thinking about, like, this doesn't seem to add up was the tree of life. If there was no death prior, then why was there a need for the tree of life? Were they going to eat from the fruit and be like double immortal? Like it just, and it was a small thing, you know, that by itself doesn't sink the YEC ship, but that was kind of the first thing that kind of like got me questioning it. And then once I got to where I was just more of a, I don't really know what I believe. I think you could be anything and it's fine. Like I'm not even really all that interested in looking into this. I saw a clip from Ken Ham, and he was at borderline at best attacking the character, the personal character of William Lane Craig. And it was strictly because William Lane Craig is not a young earth creationist. That was the only basis for this. And it was exactly like what you were saying, Adam. It was 100% just, you know, if you don't agree with the Ken Ham interpretation of Genesis, then you don't agree with the Bible. And then if you disagree with a literal reading of Genesis, then what's next? You know, the gospel's not literal. Did Jesus not literally come and die? And like, just so many just huge jumps that they're making, and seeing how divisive he was being. And Ken Ham's not the only one that's like this, and like you said too, I'm sure there are people on other views on creation that are like this as well, and I would equally call them out without issue. This is not an issue that you should divide over. I would even say if your church publicly teaches young earth creation and you are an old earth creationist, unless it's like they are belittling you or something like that, or like they're condescending towards you, I would have trouble saying that that's an issue that you should even divide, like leave a church over. But that does seem to be the case for many young earth creationists. Is this is an issue we are going to divide over. This is a hill we're going to die on, and that's not how it should be in the body.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of issues that, to me, honestly, in some ways, they're just becoming more and more difficult to navigate as far as like, oh, what should we and shouldn't we divide on? And this is honestly where I just think that most of us should just refer back to your own church. You know, like, I mean, if you want to talk about, or you have a ministry and you want to consider like who you're going to do ministry with and not do ministry with, okay, that's fine. You know, like this is a great example, like this channel.
Yeah.
This channel, for me, it is not meant for the completely new believer, the immature new Christian. And one of the reasons I say that is because, yeah, look, I'm willing to have way more people on here that I don't agree with. I'll have many more conversations with people that I don't agree with, and we can talk about those things. And to me, like, I'll be super broad on that. Now, if you wanted to talk about like, oh, hey, we're going to actually host a teaching meeting or something like that, I'll be more narrow there. right? More narrow is like, okay, who am I actually going to kind of participate in a closer level of ministry will be very different than here. But then, yeah, when you want to talk about like, all right, who's going to be kicked out of the church or allowed to stay in the church, I'm going to refer a lot more to my local church. What does my pastor say? What has he decided? Like, what does he believe? What does he think is correct? And I'm not going to be so judicial because those are the decisions that are for the pastors to make. And so I think that those are big things. And the way that most people today are policing every church in the country, I think has gotten a little bit ridiculous. So not too worried about like all those things. And some people ask me, it's like, oh, what did you think about this church? And I was like, I don't know. Depend like whatever their pastor decides is okay. Because you know what? I don't get to make those decisions. I don't have to make those decisions. And, good for them if that's what their pastor wants to do or allow to do. And I don't see it strictly prohibited in the Bible, then you know what? I'm not really going to speak against it. Because remember, like God's judgment will be on you to the degree that you judge everyone else. You want to judge them for what they say or do? Okay, fine. But I had a buddy of mine one time ask me, he was asking me about like these people that take these trips to Israel, and they take the trips, they want to have this spiritual experience. They spend all this money. And he basically was like, are they really spending that money wisely? Are they being good stewards of their money, wasting all this money on a trip to Israel when we have the God of the Bible here? We can pray or fill in the blank, right? And I understand his point, but I was basically like, do you really want to judge them on that level? Or will you let me run through your bank account and see what you spend your money on? You want to tell me that you haven't bought some cheeseburgers you don't need, or the donuts on Saturday morning, or fill in the blank of whatever stupid thing that you've spent your money on, and you want God to look at you and say like, hey, what was that for? You want to judge them for spending their money?
Yeah.
And so I just don't think that it's wise to be so strict on things that, you have no idea somebody else's life. Maybe the people that went on those trips were insanely wealthy. I don't know. But I think that there can be some great wisdom in using some good discernment on these types of things.
Oh yeah. And that's, so my channel, Basically Biblical, is a little more, narrowed, I guess. My target audience is more for not like maybe brand new believers, but newer that are looking to kind of start going deeper. So there's some issues that I will maybe not like super deep dive, even if it's something that I would really like to super deep dive on. I try to do more basic, I guess, if you will, or stuff that is going to be useful for someone who is really kind of starting to get in and evaluate some of this stuff for themselves.
See, there you go. You almost need like now we just need the guy who has the beginner basics, and then they can go from beginner basics to Basically Biblical, and then somewhere way down the road they can we'll kind of like have these progressive steps of which YouTube channel you should be watching. Like,
yeah, that's what I love. Like conversations like this. Like my two favorite things to talk about are theology and politics, and those are typically the two things that they tell you never to talk with people about because they're so divisive.
Yeah. Well, you must love Christmas time. It's right here, man. Theology and politics.
Yeah. And so I enjoyed those conversations. That's why a lot of what I listen to kind of throughout the day is either pretty, I'd say fairly intellectual, like political commentary type stuff, or I listen to a lot of Bible podcasts, kind of teaching podcasts, stuff like that, a lot of debates. I really enjoy listening to debates. I don't know if you saw, it was just like
Probably
this
not.
last week, maybe just over a week ago. The what is his name? I'd never heard of him before.
Oh, the Wes Huff and Billy Carson.
Yes.
Mhm.
I don't know if you actually watched that or not, but
No,
it
I watched kind
was
of the summary clips, but I mean, dude, I'd seen Billy Carson before, and so I've always known that Billy Carson was full of crap because I actually do know a little bit about some of those subjects, and like he just says the most outrageously, ridiculously idiotic stuff, and I was just so like praise the Lord for Wes Huff. Finally, somebody has actually shut up this moron who he literally just spouts off nonsense, and I just could not understand why other people really never fact checked him. You know, like he even was on the Joe
see
Rogan
that's I
podcast, and like they just did not challenge him because like so much what he says is just utter nonsense.
that's I had not really seen a whole lot with him before. Um, I had seen I occasionally watch is Inspiring Philosophy, and
Mhm.
I know he has done some things, kind of reacting to some things that Billy has said. But that's about the extent of anything of his that I had seen, and I saw everybody talking about this debate and just like how terrible it was for Billy Carson. And then I went in and watched it, and then I started watching. Like I did watch um, a, a couple clips from his Rogan experience or from his Rogan appearance. I watched a couple clips on he was on Patrick Bet David podcast. And so watching some of these and like it's it's beneficial that Wes was able to get on there and handle it like he did. I think it was a master class of not only just like winning the debate, but doing so in a way that he didn't come across as condescending. He didn't come across as um, how a lot of people would view a Christian. He came across as very level headed, just like and a lot of the stuff were just like questions, like Billy would say something. He's like, okay, well about that, like what do you say about this? And he was just asking Billy to say more, and he there was what was the claim? The Billy called it the Sinai Bible. He said that there's no um, crucifixion in there. And Wes was like, well, I actually have a copy of it right here. And he turned around and pulled it off. And he's like, and it does
Mhm.
have the crucifix. And so it was great. Anybody that hasn't watched it, if you want a good laugh, it was very, very entertaining to watch. But I enjoy debates.
So
One I
you'll be
really, really
watching my
like.
debates, right?
I have watched the which was it? Your Kent Hovind.
Mhm.
I did watch your debate with him. I feel like there's another one I saw too, but I may not have. I watched some of
Did you
your
watch the one I did against Praise?
longer teachings too. Against who?
Praise I am was his name. We debated if believers
I
go
don't
to
think
heaven
so.
or not. I've actually gotten some of the most
Oh
compliments
no!
and
I haven't
comments
seen
on
that.
that one. So you should watch that.
I'll check. It's on my. I've got a watch later on
Yeah,
YouTube
yeah.
of like a playlist, and so as I see stuff, I'll add it to that, and then I keep working my way down. It is on there though. But like
And then, like I said,
one
I'll
of my
be
favorite all
debating
times
Turretin
was
tomorrow. So sorry.
what time is that at?
It should be. Hold on. Let me. It should be. See, I have to adjust all the time scales, so I'm not sure
Yeah,
what.
I do have
Because
two.
it's at
So
like six
I've got
thirty.
a
Yeah. My
so
time,
I've
but
got
no, that's not your time.
yeah, I've got a trip coming up. I'm gonna have to drive. it's going to be like a 14-hour drive, and I'm going through the night. So my kids sleep, less stops, less all that. But since majority of that drive, I will be awake, driving alone in the car, like the only person awake in the car. That's when I'll listen to a lot of that stuff. So I'll probably, if I'm not able to catch it tomorrow, I'll end up listening to it then. One of my favorite to listen to was Braxton Hunter and Matt Dillahunty. It's been a long time since that happened, but the look in your face, I'm guessing maybe you're familiar with it.
I can hardly watch Matt Dillahunty. Matt Dillahunty is such a.
Well, I think Braxton ended it well. He rebutted anything that Matt was saying. I think he did it successfully. And then the very end of it, I think, just to point out how completely absurd Matt Dillahunty's stance is, he ended it with a question of, if a meteor were to smash into the moon and the debris left behind said Jesus is God, but it didn't just say it in English, it said it in English, in Spanish, in French, in Swahili, in Japanese, like it listed 30 different languages. Would you say that Jesus is God? And Matt said no, because it could just be aliens playing a prank on us. Okay, so at this point, you're not looking for evidence. You're just trying to find something that backs up the presupposition that you have, so that way you don't have to, at least in your mind, you don't have to deal with the consequences of there is a God, he is real, and you are sinning against that God. But no, I thought that was a good one. I go back and watch that occasionally too. But that was my first experience with Matt Dillahunty.
Oh, really? That was your first experience? Oh no.
Yeah.
I used to watch some of his stuff on the Atheist Experience.
Okay. So I really I started off, my dad was a pastor, and so I knew a lot of like the language and stuff around Christianity, around theological topics and things like that. And so I could have a conversation with somebody for the most part. But I didn't spend a whole lot of time myself digging into a lot of theological issues. I really, really enjoyed politics. I still really enjoy politics. But I ended up, it was probably 5 years ago now, 6 years ago, maybe. I started feeling convicted because I spent a ton of time listening to political talk and different political stances, things like that. And I'm like, I could debate circles around somebody on like economic policy on this one particular issue or something like that. But I'm not going to be able to go anything further than like surface level on anything with Christianity. And I believe that this is like the truth, capital T truth. And so I did a year at first. I decided I'm going to do, or no, I did it at first. I did it a month. So I'm going to do a month. I'm going to listen to nothing except for like preaching, teaching, maybe like Christian music, but that was it. And I really was not familiar with like anybody in the theology YouTube space at all. I started off listening to like, Stephen Furtick was one I used to listen to. Not proud to admit that, but Stephen Furtick was one I used to listen to. And then I started Ruslan. If anyone's familiar with him, he was one of the early ones I saw. I liked his stuff. And then from him, I ran into Mike Winger, then Trinity Radio, and then Remnant Radio, and then Michael Jones. Michael Jones is the one that really like got me to start rethinking like everything I grew up believing, because like I was listening to him and it was like it was good. I liked the stuff he was saying. And then he started talking about being a theistic evolutionist and talking against young earth creation, and I'm like, oh man, I can't listen to this guy anymore. And but it was like the stuff he was saying was making sense. And so then like I started like, okay, like what's really going on with this? And that led to that. Shortly after that, my eschatological view ended up changing as well.
What is it
And it
now?
just, I mean, it's
Definitely
been,
have to know.
I would say I don't hold it super tightly. I would say I lean probably either post mill or on mill. But I again, I was raised pre mill, and I was raised like pre mill is it. Like I legitimately had the thought that this is a consensus among Christianity. Like there are only some fringe people that think otherwise. And I don't think I was ever explicitly told that, but just the way it was presented, that was kind of what I thought. And so yeah, now I would say I lean more either post mill or on mill. I'm not super definitive on it. I hold it pretty loosely. Eventually I'll do more of a deep dive into it and see what I actually think. But that's what a lot of like the last really like probably 5 years for me has been, going back and actually basically like deconstructing. Not to the extent, you know, I'm not like an atheist or an, what do they say, ex-evangelical or anything like that. I still, I believe all the core tenets of Christianity. But that stuff that I legitimately looked at, like, is this real? And it didn't take long, really. Once you start digging in, you can see like the evidence for Christianity is pretty overwhelming. Especially if you're looking at it objectively, archaeological, historical, I mean, philosophical. I think everything really clearly points to Christianity. But that really started like all the views that I held before. I started like re-looking at, and that's kind of what led me to really start going into debates, because I think that's one of the best ways to really understand a topic, is to listen to a debate between two people that really understand their side but also the other side. If you can listen through, you can probably learn more in a 2-hour debate with two really good debaters listening to it than 10 hours of lecture, I think.
Yeah. Well, hey man, let's get a wrap up here and stuff for now. Gotta get going actually.
Right.
But yeah, it's been fun. And you guys can see Jesse at Basically Biblical. I think you're on YouTube and podcast and on X as well. So popular. And then, yes, yeah, tune in. I'll be debating Turton Fan tomorrow. He's actually, I saw when I was pulling up the video, he is actually streaming live right now, debunking all of my position. That's his thing that he's doing right now. And so we'll see how debunked it is tomorrow. So looking forward to that. And then yeah, so if you're interested in debates, I have that one coming up. I'm debating Ben in January, Ben Kissling on Young Earth and Old Earth. That should be an interesting debate. And then I've also got CJ, him and I will be debating animal death. So unfortunately, he must not have watched my prior debate. Otherwise, he would know he's already lost. So, but yeah, man, great conversation. And yeah, we'll look to see you guys in the next video.